His fiancée abandoned the maid in the snow, until the billionaire found her and changed her life. This little girl was treated like she didn't belong, until she shocked everyone. Nobody in that ballroom expected what happened next. Not the billionaire. Not his fiancée. Not the hundreds of guests sipping champagne under crystal chandeliers. Because the woman they'd all dismissed as just the maid was about to reveal something that would bring a grown man to his knees. But before we get there, let me take you back. Back to a snowy night, a locked door, and a woman left out in the cold by the very people who were supposed to care for her. Hey, welcome back to the channel. Before we dive in, tell me, where are you watching from today? Which country do you call home? Drop it in the comments. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Today's story is one about cruelty hiding behind money, and kindness hiding behind a uniform. It's about a maid nobody valued, a fiancée who thought her class made her better, and a billionaire who was about to learn the most important lesson of his life. Stay with me till the end. You will not see this coming. The snow outside Whitmore Manor fell like it had a grudge against the world. Clara Bennett, 29 years old, stood on the back steps of the mansion in a thin gray coat, her breath turning to fog in the freezing Connecticut air. She'd been locked out. Not by accident. On purpose. "Ma'am, please," Clara had said only 20 minutes earlier, standing in the grand foyer with her arms full of folded linens. "I finished the West Wing. I was just going to warm up in the kitchen before the next round." Vanessa Cole, 31, engaged to one of the wealthiest men on the eastern seaboard, had barely looked up from her phone. "The kitchen is for staff who've earned a break. You've been slow all week, Clara. Maybe some fresh air will wake you up." And with that, Vanessa had nodded to the head of security, and Clara found herself outside, the door bolted behind her, her thin uniform no match for a Massachusetts winter storm. Clara didn't argue. She never did. She had learned, over 3 years of working at the Whitmore estate, that arguing with Vanessa Cole was like arguing with a locked vault. It simply didn't open, no matter how reasonable you were. So she stood there, hugging herself, watching her breath disappear into the dark. She thought about her daughter, Maya, 5 years old, asleep at her sister's apartment across town. She thought about the rent due in 4 days. She thought about the associate's degree in accounting she never got to finish because her mother got sick and the medical bills swallowed everything she'd saved. Clara Bennett had once dreamed of numbers, of spreadsheets and audits and a corner office with her name on the door. Now she dreamed of nothing more than getting through each freezing shift without breaking. She didn't know that 15 feet away, in the West Garden Pavilion, a man was watching her. Daniel Whitmore, 32 years old, CEO of Whitmore Global Holdings, had stepped outside for air after a suffocating dinner with investors. He'd meant to smoke exactly 1 cigarette he wasn't supposed to be smoking and go back inside. Instead, he found himself frozen, not from the cold but from what he was seeing. A woman standing in the snow, alone, shivering. Not moving toward shelter, not banging on doors, not causing a scene. Just enduring it. Like she'd trained herself to endure things quietly. Daniel had grown up around this house. He knew every maid who'd worked there in the last decade, at least by face. But something about Clara's stillness struck him differently than anyone he'd seen before. There was a dignity in the way she held herself. Even in the cold, even humiliated. Didn't look like weakness. It looked like a woman who had decided, a long time ago, that dignity was the only thing nobody could take from her. He walked toward her before he even decided to. "Ma'am," he said, "are you all right? Why are you out here?" Clara startled, straightening immediately, wiping any trace of emotion from her face. A reflex built from years of never letting her employer see her struggle. "I'm fine, sir. Just getting some air. In this weather. Without a proper coat. I don't mind the cold," she lied. Daniel studied her for a long moment. He didn't recognize her specifically. There were over 40 staff members across his properties, But something about her answer, the practiced calm of it, told him this wasn't the first time she'd been left out here. "Who locked this door?" he asked quietly. Clara hesitated. In her 3 years of service, she had learned the golden rule of survival in wealthy households. Never, under any circumstances, expose the people above you. Not because you owed them loyalty, but because the ones who spoke up were the ones who disappeared from the payroll the fastest. "It must have locked automatically, sir," she said. "The wind." Daniel's jaw tightened. He didn't believe her. But he also recognized in that moment that pushing her wouldn't get him the truth. So instead he took off his own coat, a navy wool overcoat that cost more than Clara made in 2 months, and draped it over her shoulders. "Come inside through the front," he said. "You shouldn't be standing out here." Clara froze, stunned. In 3 years, no employer, no guest, no member of the Whitmore family had ever offered her so much as a spare umbrella. "Sir, I couldn't." "You could and you will," Daniel said, something firm but gentle in his voice. "Nobody should be left in the cold. Not in my house." As they walked toward the front entrance together, neither of them noticed the curtain in the second-floor window shift ever so slightly. Vanessa Cole watching, her eyes narrowing at the sight of her fiancé walking side by side with the maid she'd just locked outside. Something had been set into motion that night. Something Vanessa would spend the rest of the story trying, and failing to undo. Because Daniel Whitmore was about to discover that the woman he'd just rescued from the snow was carrying a secret far bigger than anyone in that mansion could have guessed. And it would change everything. His engagement, his company, and his entire understanding of what kind of person deserved his trust. Nobody in that house expected Daniel to remember a maid's name the next morning, but he did. The following day, Daniel found himself unable to focus during his 9 a.m. finance meeting. His mind kept drifting back to the woman in the snow, the quiet composure in her voice, the way she tried to protect Vanessa even while suffering because of her. At lunch, he asked his household manager, Mr. Ferris, a simple question. "The woman who was locked outside last night. Clara. What do you know about her?" Mr. Ferris, a man who had served the Whitmore family for over 20 years and had learned to read the temperature of every request, chose his words carefully. "She's one of our most reliable staff members, sir. Punctual. Thorough. Keeps to herself." "Does this happen often? Her being left outside?" Ferris hesitated just long enough for Daniel to understand the answer was yes. "Miss Cole has her own way of managing the staff, sir," Ferris said diplomatically. "I try not to interfere." Daniel felt something twist in his chest, not quite anger but close to it. He had known Vanessa for 2 years. Their engagement had been, if he was honest with himself, more strategic than romantic, a merger of 2 prominent families, orchestrated as much by their parents as by any authentic connection. He'd told himself the warmth would come with time. Now he wondered if he'd simply never looked closely enough at who she really was. That afternoon, he found an excuse to walk through the West Wing, where he accidentally crossed paths with Clara as she was cleaning the library. "Ms. Bennett," he said, using her last name out of respect, something none of his family ever did with staff. "I wanted to make sure you were all right after last night." Clara straightened, smoothing her apron. "I'm fine, sir. Thank you for the coat. I left it with Mr. Ferris to return to you." "You didn't have to return it so quickly. It didn't feel right to keep something so." She searched for the word. "Expensive." Daniel almost smiled. "It's just a coat, Clara." "Not everything is just a thing, sir," she said quietly. "Sometimes a coat means someone saw you. That's worth more than the coat itself." Something in her words struck him deeply. He'd spent his whole life surrounded by people who wanted things from him. Investments, connections, marriage alliances. Nobody had ever said something so simple, so honest, without any angle behind it. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Why do you stay? Working here, I mean. You clearly have." He paused, choosing his words. More to you than most people give you credit for. Clara's eyes flickered, surprise, maybe even suspicion. Rich men didn't usually ask maids about their inner lives. I have a daughter, she said finally. Maya. She's 5. I stay because the pay is steady, and steady is what she needs right now. And before this job. Clara's guard came up slightly. Before this job doesn't matter anymore, sir. Daniel didn't push. But he noticed something. The careful way she avoided specifics, the practiced deflection, like someone protecting a story she wasn't ready to tell. He filed it away, curious but respectful. Over the following 2 weeks, small moments accumulated. Daniel found himself lingering in rooms Clara was cleaning, asking her opinion on things. Which flowers to plant in spring, which books in his library were worth reading. He discovered she was remarkably sharp, quoting figures and percentages from a documentary she'd watched about the 2008 financial crash with more clarity than half his board members. You should have studied economics, he told her once, only half joking. Clara's laugh was small, guarded. I did actually. 2 years of it. Before life had other plans. Meanwhile, Vanessa was not blind to what was happening. She watched Daniel's shifting attention with growing fury, disguised beneath cold, calculated smiles at dinner parties. She began finding new reasons to criticize Clara's work. A wrinkle in a bedsheet, a smudge on a mirror, a 5-minute delay in serving tea. Each infraction was met with increasingly harsh punishment. Extra shifts, docked pay, humiliating public reprimands in front of other staff. She's testing you, Mr. Ferris warned Clara quietly one evening. Don't give her a reason. I know, Clara whispered back. I need this job, Mr. Ferris. Can't lose it. Not because of him. But it was already too late for that. Because 3 nights later, at the estate's annual charity gala, the biggest event of the year, attended by senators, CEOs, and half of Boston's high society, Vanessa Cole would make a decision so cruel, so public, that it would unravel everything she'd built. And it would force Clara Bennett to finally reveal the truth she'd been hiding for 3 long years. A truth that had nothing to do with being just a maid, and everything to do with who she really was before life brought her to her knees. The gala was everything Whitmore Manor did best. Chandeliers dripping gold light, a string quartet playing softly near the marble staircase, servers gliding between 400 of the wealthiest people in New England. Clara wasn't supposed to be anywhere near the main hall that night. Her job was strictly logistics, coordinating with the catering staff in the kitchen, making sure trays moved seamlessly from stove to silver platter. But when one of the servers twisted her ankle on the back stairs an hour before doors opened, Mr. Ferris, in a moment of panic, asked Clara to fill in. Just for tonight, he said. Stay near the edges. Serve, smile, disappear. Clara agreed, though something in her stomach tightened at the thought of being visible in a room full of Vanessa's most important guests. For the first 2 hours, everything went smoothly. Clara moved gracefully between groups, refilling glasses, offering hors d'oeuvres, staying invisible exactly as instructed. Daniel caught her eye once across the room and gave her the smallest, warmest smile, one that made her chest ache with something she didn't have the luxury of naming. Then Vanessa found her opportunity. It happened near the dessert table, where a cluster of the evening's most prominent guests, including a state senator and the CEO of a major investment firm, had gathered to discuss, of all things, market volatility and the recent turbulence in bond yields. It's simple mismanagement, the senator was saying confidently. The Fed should have raised rates 6 months earlier. Anyone with basic financial literacy could see that coming. Vanessa, sensing an opportunity to entertain her guests at someone else's expense, turned with a cruel little smile toward Clara, who was quietly refilling water glasses nearby. Clara dear, Vanessa said, her voice dripping with theatrical sweetness, loud enough for the whole circle to hear. What do you think caused the bond market crash? You seem like such a deep thinker. The group chuckled, assuming this was simply Vanessa's idea of a joke, mocking the help for entertainment. Clara froze, water pitcher in hand, her heart hammering. She recognized exactly what this was. A public humiliation dressed up as a question, designed to remind everyone in the room, including Daniel, exactly where she belonged in the social order. I wouldn't know, ma'am, Clara said quietly, keeping her eyes down, trying to retreat into the safety of invisibility. But Vanessa wasn't finished. Oh, come now. Don't be shy. You're always so quiet. Surely you have opinions rattling around in there somewhere. The senator, oblivious to the cruelty beneath the words, laughed. Let the girl speak, Vanessa. Might be refreshing to hear from someone outside the bubble. The circle turned expectantly toward Clara. Daniel, who had just approached the group in time to hear the exchange, felt his stomach drop. He opened his mouth to intervene, to shut this down before it went further. But Clara spoke first. Something in her had reached its limit. If you actually want to know, Clara said, her voice steady now, quiet but clear. The senator's partially right, but he's missing the bigger picture. The Fed didn't just move late. They misjudged the lag effect of quantitative tightening on regional banks. That's what triggered the liquidity crunch in March. It wasn't one policy mistake. It was 3 compounding failures. Delayed rate normalization, inadequate stress testing on mid-sized banks, and a market that had priced in a soft landing nobody had actually modeled correctly. Silence. Complete stunned silence. The investment CEO blinked. That's actually a remarkably sharp analysis. The senator, no longer laughing, studied Clara with new eyes. Where did you study economics? Clara's hands trembled slightly around the water pitcher. Every eye in the circle was now on her, not with mockery, but with genuine startled curiosity. Vanessa's face had gone rigid, her cruel joke having spectacularly backfired. I studied it a long time ago, Clara said softly. Before things changed. That's not just textbook knowledge, the CEO pressed, clearly intrigued. That's practitioner-level analysis. Did you work in finance? Clara's eyes flickered toward Daniel, who was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Shock, yes, but underneath it, something like recognition, like pieces of a puzzle sliding into place. I was an analyst, Clara said finally, the words coming out like a confession. At Hargrove Capital. Before the layoffs. Before my mother got sick. Before a lot of things. The name landed in the circle like a small explosion. Hargrove Capital was one of the most respected boutique investment firms in Boston. Notoriously difficult to get hired at, notoriously selective about talent. Hargrove doesn't hire just anyone, the CEO said slowly. Clara. Bennett. Wait. His eyes widened with sudden recognition. You're the Clara Bennett who published that paper on regional bank contagion risk? The one that predicted 3 of last year's bank failures 18 months in advance. The entire circle turned to stare at her with new intensity. Daniel felt the floor shift beneath him. He had been falling for a woman he thought was simply kind, simply dignified, simply extraordinary in quiet ways. He had no idea he'd also been employing one of the sharpest financial minds to have walked through Hargrove Capital's doors, a woman so talented her predictions had once made headlines in financial circles, before life had stripped her down to a maid's uniform and forced her into invisibility. Vanessa, sensing her humiliation spiraling completely out of control, tried to laugh it off. Well, isn't that a fun party trick, she said, her voice brittle. Clara, why don't you get back to the kitchen? I'm sure the senator has real experts to discuss this with. But it was too late. The damage, to Vanessa's careful social hierarchy, to the story she'd built about who deserved respect in that house, was already done. And Daniel Whitmore, staring at the woman who had just quietly dismantled his fiancée's cruelty with nothing but the truth, understood in that moment that everything he thought he knew about his life was about to change. The gala ended in a blur of hushed conversations and curious glances, but the real reckoning happened 3 days later, in Daniel's private study. He had spent those 3 days doing what any careful, methodical businessman would do, quietly researching. He found the paper the CEO had referenced, Contagion Pathways in Regional Banking, a predictive framework, published 4 years earlier under the name Clara M. Bennett. He found the layoff notice from Hargrove Capital, dated 2.5 years ago, part of a mass restructuring that had eliminated 40% of their analyst team, timing that lined up exactly with when Clara said her mother had gotten sick. He found medical records his lawyer discreetly, and with Daniel's explicit instruction to stop the moment it felt invasive, confirmed existed. A mother battling stage 3 ovarian cancer, treatments that cost more than Clara's entire annual salary at Hargrove, savings depleted within 8 months. He found a small apartment lease under Clara's name in a modest part of Worcester, shared with her sister, where a 5-year-old girl named Maya had grown up without much, but, according to a neighbor Daniel's assistant had briefly and carefully spoken to, surrounded by more love than most children with 10 times the resources. Daniel sat with all of this information for a long time, feeling something in his chest that he could only describe as shame, not for anything he had done, but for the world he had unknowingly participated in. A world where a brilliant woman could be reduced to invisibility, where wealth decided whose intelligence mattered and whose didn't, where his own fiancée could look at a human being with a mind like Clara's and see only a target for casual cruelty. He called Clara to his study that evening. She arrived nervous, hands folded in front of her uniform, clearly expecting to be reprimanded or worse, dismissed. Employees who caused scenes at events like the gala rarely lasted long, regardless of how justified they'd been. "Sir, if this is about the gala, I want to apologize," she began immediately. "I shouldn't have spoken like that in front of your guests. I understand if—" "Clara," Daniel said gently, cutting her off. "Please sit down." She sat, hesitantly, on the edge of a leather armchair, clearly bracing for bad news. "I know about Hargrove," Daniel said. "I know about your mother. I know about the paper you published, the one that predicted 3 bank failures before anyone else saw them coming. I know you've been carrying all of this while scrubbing my floors and refilling my guests' wine glasses." Clara's composure finally cracked. Tears welled in her eyes, not from sadness, but from the exhausting weight of being truly seen after so long. "I didn't want anyone's pity," she whispered. "I just wanted to keep my job, keep Maya fed. I didn't think—" "You didn't think anyone would care enough to look past the uniform," Daniel finished quietly. Clara nodded, unable to speak. "I care," Daniel said. "And I think what happened to you, the layoffs, your mother's illness, everything you've sacrificed just to survive, none of that erases who you are. If anything, it proves exactly how strong you are." He paused, choosing his next words carefully, because he knew they would change everything. "I want to offer you a position at Whitmore Global. Not as staff. As an analyst. I have an opening on my strategy team, and frankly, after what I read of your work, I'd be a fool not to have someone with your mind on it." Clara stared at him, stunned into silence. "Sir, Daniel," he corrected softly. "Please." "Daniel," she repeated, testing the name. "I don't know what to say." "Say yes," he said, smiling for the first time in what felt like weeks. "Say yes, and let people finally see what I've been seeing this whole time." But their quiet, hopeful moment was interrupted by the study door slamming open. Vanessa stood in the doorway, her face pale with fury, having clearly overheard enough of the conversation to understand exactly what was happening. "You're offering her a job." Vanessa's voice cracked with disbelief. "Daniel, she's the help. She serves drinks. She cleans toilets. And now you want to hand her a position at the company my father helped you build connections for. She's a Hargrove-trained analyst who predicted the regional banking crisis before it happened, Vanessa," Daniel said, his voice hardening. "She's more qualified than half the people on my board." "She's beneath you," Vanessa snapped, And the moment the words left her mouth, something shifted permanently in Daniel's expression. "Beneath me," he repeated slowly. "The woman you locked outside in a snowstorm because she wanted to warm up in the kitchen? The woman you humiliated in front of a senator, trying to make her look stupid, only to have her outsmart every person in that circle? That woman is beneath me." Vanessa's mouth opened, then closed, realizing too late she had cornered herself. "I think," Daniel said quietly, "you've shown me exactly who you are tonight. And it's not someone I recognize as the woman I proposed to 2 years ago." The room fell into a heavy, suffocating silence, the kind that precedes an ending nobody had seen coming, not even Vanessa herself, who had spent months trying to protect her position, only to destroy it with her own cruelty. The engagement ended 3 weeks later, quietly, through lawyers and carefully worded statements to the press about differing life paths. Vanessa Cole moved out of Whitmore Manor, and though she tried, briefly, to spin the story to friends in her social circle, the truth of what had happened at the gala had already spread through Boston's elite too widely to control. Clara Bennett, meanwhile, began her new position at Whitmore Global Holdings 6 weeks later, after politely insisting on completing a full, fair interview process rather than simply accepting a favor. She wanted to earn it, not be handed it, a decision that impressed Daniel more than almost anything else about her. Within her first year, Clara's risk assessment models saved the company an estimated $40 million by flagging exposure to a regional lending partner 3 months before its near collapse. Her colleagues, who had initially whispered about the CEO's maid, quickly learned to simply call her Bennett, with the same respect given to any senior analyst, because her work spoke louder than any rumor ever could. Maya, now 6, started first grade that fall in a good school in a good neighborhood, in an apartment that finally had heat that worked reliably, and a mother who came home each evening without the exhaustion of scrubbing other people's floors weighing down her shoulders. And Daniel and Clara? Well, that part of the story unfolded slowly, carefully, the way real love does when 2 people have both been hurt enough to know better than to rush. It started with dinners that were technically work discussions. Then it became weekend visits where Daniel would sit on the floor of Clara's small apartment, helping Maya build block towers while Clara laughed at how a billionaire had never actually learned to stack blocks properly. Eventually, quietly, without any grand gesture or public announcement, it became something neither of them needed to explain to anyone else, because it was simply, finally, real. 1 year after that snowy night at the gala, Daniel proposed to Clara, not in a ballroom full of important guests, but in the same garden pavilion where he'd first seen her standing in the cold. This time she wasn't shivering. This time she wasn't invisible. This time, when he opened the small velvet box, Maya stood beside them, giggling, having been let in on the secret weeks earlier. "You saw me when nobody else did," Clara told him through tears. "Not just that night in the snow. Every day after that. You were never invisible, Clara," Daniel said, wiping her tears with his thumb. "The world just wasn't paying attention. I'm glad I was." And so, dear viewers, that's the story of Clara Bennett, a woman who was locked out in the cold and treated as though she didn't matter, until the truth of who she really was finally came to light. A woman who never asked for pity, only for the chance to be seen for the mind and heart she'd carried all along. The lesson here is simple, but it's one worth carrying with you. Never judge someone's worth by the uniform they wear, the job title on their name tag, or the circumstances life has forced upon them. Sometimes the person quietly refilling your water glass has survived more, sacrificed more, and knows more than anyone sitting comfortably at the table. If this story moved you even a little, give it a like. It truly helps this channel reach more people who need to hear stories like Clara's. Subscribe if you haven't already, because there are so many more stories like this one waiting for you. And if you know someone who could use a little hope today, someone who's had a hard season and needs to be reminded that their worth was never up for debate, share this with them. Thank you for watching till the very end. I'll see you in the next story.